Hello humans, it's just Martine and welcome to part 2 of my 2021 Buzzwordathon redemption round. Woohoo! If you have no idea what I'm talking about, go ahead and watch yesterday's video, it's right there. I'm quickly going to go over the 6 prompts that I'm going to be reading from in this video. They span from July to December, and in the following order, they go last, time of day, dark, elements, lost, and day/month/season. Let's get into it. The other day, I finished my July prompt. The July prompt was last, and I read The Last Thing She Saw, and I ended up giving this a 2 stars, but I made this whole list of things that I kind of wanted to talk about. It didn't get a 1 star because it didn't make me upset, but I did have a couple of big concerns across time. In general, I found the writing style quite choppy. This was both in actual prose wise and then also in the conception of the whole story. The pacing was off, and so was the general writing for my tastes. There were a couple details that were really random. For example, she knew the smell of wine specifically on her mother's breath. That was a little weird because the main character was 15 and yeah, her mom drank a lot of alcohol, but it just kind of caught me off guard. There were so many weird characters in this book. It basically starts with the main character going to a cemetery because she gets an anonymous invitation to go to the cemetery, and it turns out that she's invited to join this friend group with 3 really mean, popular-ish girls, and they do this weird ceremony. And then the whole plot of the book is supposed to revolve around the fact that one of those girls, the one that's actually nice, ends up going missing and then is later found dead. And so it's kind of about her death, kind of a mystery figuring out who done it, kind of random. And there were also a lot of things that were very convenient. She'd be driving home late at night, be dark, be scared, and somebody had previously appeared on the front porch when the light was off. So she was like, did I turn on the light this time? Did I turn on the light this time? And then she would pull up and the light was on. So it was trying to be thrilling and suspenseful, but was really anticlimactic in a lot of ways. I also felt the mystery itself made little to no sense. Some things were discovered via kind of supernatural, answers were coming to this girl in her dreams, right? And first of all, the police were taking that seriously. And she also wasn't known to have any weird psychic abilities or anything. So it was just kind of strange. And then that turned out to be a totally separate thing. She found an answer and it wasn't actually the answer that everybody thought it was. That's all I can say without directly spoiling it. But it was just bizarre. There was also page time given to things that straight up didn't matter. It would be on this night, I'm sitting on the couch and then my grandma says goodnight, and then they move on. It was kind of weird. So it reads pretty young, but she's 15, and it had some interesting aspects for sure. The supernatural aspects were kind of interesting to me, especially her grandma got this vision of a fireball every time somebody in their family was about to die. So that was kind of interesting, and I liked her grandma as a character. And then there was an attempt at a love triangle. So there was a guy she had a crush on, and then there was her, and then there was the guy next door to his grandma who was clearly interested in her. Pretty quickly she lost interest in this guy she had a crush on. But then also the guy next door was clearly the better option. You know how most times in a love triangle, there's a debate as to who you want a person to end up with? No, I don't think anybody could argue that the one guy was the right choice. I had an okay time reading it. It was a really quick read, so 1 prompt done. For the time of day prompt, I just finished reading Apache Dawn and I'm giving it 2 stars. It was entirely too long just to not be a complete story at all, in my opinion. It was more of a complete story than it could have been, but it was very much the beginning of a series, and you're not going to get most, the majority of the answers that you would want from this book for it to be almost 700 pages long. It's about this breakout of a pandemic, and it's caused by bioterrorism, and it's actually a mutation and a new strain of this form of influenza that caused a pandemic maybe a decade before in this timeline. They took that pandemic and reconfigured it and then released it again to get all the people that weren't killed in the pandemic the first time. This book is following multiple perspectives. It's following a guy named Chad who appears to be immune to this disease and who was used to make the vaccine that they made after the first round of the pandemic. It follows some people in different branches of the armed forces, whether it's like there were some Marines, there were Navy SEALs, there were Rangers, Army, Air Force, all that jazz, lots of them. It followed the Vice President of the United States, who then became the president, and the ways in which he was being manipulated and attempted to start a dictatorship of the country. It also briefly followed this woman who had been in the armed forces, but she specifically worked with like the CDC, I believe, and so she was a disease expert, so she was in there. I'm trying to remember if there was anybody else. It was a lot of perspectives and like a lot was happening, but the first chunk of it was really hard to get through. So like I started reading this on November 9th and it's now November 28th. That's a really long time for me to be reading a book, and I read a third of it today when I'm giving you this update. So it was like the first 2/3 of it just felt incredibly difficult to get through, probably because there was so much military stuff happening and like a lot of military talk, and I just wasn't interested in that. I'm not interested in that. But by the end I was getting into it a little bit more because what was happening with the vice president's perspective was like pretty interesting. I was trying to figure out what was going on with him and stuff, and luckily we did get answers, well, some answers to that, which was good. I would have been really upset if they hadn't given me any answers to it. I'm not interested in continuing the series, and it's done now. So that's my review. I think the prompt I read this for was the word dark. Anyway, I read We Set the Dark on Fire, and I gave it 4 stars, maybe 4.5. I think I gave it 4.5. The point is I loved it. I went into this book like I go into almost every book, knowing absolutely nothing. I have seen this around more. It wasn't a book I got like for free, like I don't own it. I basically got it through Prime Reading. It's available on Prime Reading, so I turned it back in after I read it, so I can check out another Prime Reading book in the future. But I went in knowing nothing. And to be honest with you, I'm glad I did. If I knew anything about this, I'm not sure if I would have been enthused about it, but reading it was so interesting. It's about this culture, and in this culture, a man has 2 wives. The first is basically his equal, his strategizing partner, definitely an intellectual type of partnership, a big supporter. And the second is for like beauty and grace and running the household, bearing the children, things like that. This book follows a really recent graduate, like she graduates in like the first chapter of a school that trains these different types of wives. And she's trained to be the like intellectual partner, equal type, and she's actually from beyond the wall, and she managed to get like illegally into the country when she was really tiny, like 4, and she lived on the outskirts, and now she's marrying into like the wealthiest, the most influential family in the entire island. Of course, she's still there illegally, so she's very nervous about being found out, anxious. And when the book starts, this person breaks into her school and gives her new papers and says the old ones that you have won't work here, and basically gets her to start working for this resistance movement, kind of against her will, like blackmailing her into it. And additionally, when she goes to get married to her new husband, the person that is the second wife of her husband, the one that's about like beauty, grace, running the home, things like that, is actually her enemy from school, who basically made fun of her for being poor the whole time she was there. So there's obviously some tension there. So she moves into her new place and she sees like how grandly the upper class in this society is living. She's butting heads with this second wife. She's scared. She's trying to get intel to these people who are blackmailing her. It's a whole mess, and it's beautiful. Add in the fact that somewhere around this book, it turns into an LGBTQIA+ book. Love that element. I won't specify about where, when, whatever, because I think that's a nice surprise and addition, although it's probably included on like the back of the book somewhere, because you know, they like to spoil things that happen halfway through a book. But overall, this was so interesting and unique. I thought the culture was really good. The country, like political world building and stuff, was fascinating. I thought learning about the training of the different wives was great. At the beginning of each chapter, there was a quote from like the handbook that they learned from in school about how to be these certain types of wives, and that was so interesting and insightful, and just like the perfect little touch at the beginning of every chapter. This was a bit of a long one, which I think is why it didn't get a full 5 stars for me. There were points where I felt like it dragged a little bit, but on the whole, this was so interesting, and I was expecting it to take me a lot longer to read this book than it actually did because it was long, and I thought maybe it would be more slow moving. But even though there were parts that were slow, I was just like turning the pages, interested in picking it up, that kind of thing. I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. If you have Amazon Prime, it is available on Prime Reading, I'm pretty sure. So go check it out, and I'm hopefully going to be reading the second one in this series pretty soon. I think this was for the October prompt of Elements. I read Water Memory, and I ended up giving this a surprising 4 stars. Why is it surprising, you might ask? Well, the first couple chapters of this book, I have no memory of reading, and that's because, as occasionally happens, I read it right before bed. And I read a couple of books, I switch back and forth between bed, but like this was like, my brain was on its way out, and I was almost to the point of being asleep, and I read the first few chapters, and I have no memory of it, which is hysterical considering the fact that the main character in this book is losing her memory, and that the first several chapters are about her losing her memory. And I have no memory of that. When you don't get the beginning of a book, sometimes you're like, ooh, I don't think I'm going to enjoy the rest of it, especially because it seemed to be a pretty complex beginning. As I was like coming to and diving into the book and actually being like cognizant of what I was reading, she was not a secret agent, but something weird of some kind. And I was like, what did I miss? So I thought I would just be behind the whole book. But once the main character got on the cargo ship, I was with her the rest of the way. So actually the majority of the book, I think the first 10% really didn't connect with me, but then after that we were off to the races. And this had the potential to be a book I really didn't enjoy, because although it's marketed as a thriller, or at least I believe it was marketed as a thriller because I got it on Amazon First Reads, there was so much action. There was a lot of action, and I think we all know by now how I feel about action sequences. I don't like them. I do not like them. So the fact that I was able to read through action sequences, some of which were pretty long, I remained relatively interested, and not only just interested, but like aware of what was happening. Like I kept up with what was happening in the action sequences, or that rarely happens. So that was a great sign to me. Water Memory is about this woman who has this weird job, and her kids don't know that she has this job, but her husband has recently passed away from cancer, and she decides she needs to go on vacation because she's losing her memory. She doesn't really know why. And so she's very scared, so she decides to go not on a cruise, because cruises are really expensive and there are lots of people there, but instead on this weird cargo ship cruise where you board a cargo ship for significantly cheaper, and there are a few other passengers, but you're on there. So you're at sea, but you don't have the like Vegas style energy of a regular cruise ship. So she goes on this trip, and then the boat is taken in by pirates for insurance purposes. Like pirates take it to make this whole deal so that people make a lot of money off of it. The point is pirates attack, and she's very well trained, and so the attack does not go as the pirates have anticipated originally, because they did not anticipate her. She's a really cool character. I also thought it was interesting that you saw her lose her memory and forget where she was at times, but you still knew everything that was happening. And in some ways it made it like more anxiety inducing for me, because I was like, oh no, she doesn't know where she is, and that's really bad. Like she needs to know what's happening because she was on the verge of like doing something. So that was an interesting like aspect of it. I also appreciated that it touched on the issues that some parents have when they have these secretive jobs, or they work for the government, or they're deployed different places, they go all around the world, and the times in their children's lives that they miss, and the children's perspective on that versus like the parents' perspective on that, because we also got her son and her daughter. They had some ideas about it because again, her husband was gone, so the only person that was related to her that was really around were her son and her daughter. All the characters on the cargo ship were like really interesting, and I liked those character buildings, and again, the main character was a fascinating person in general. I enjoyed it. I only have 2 prompts left to go, but when I'm filming this clip, I only have 1 book left to read for this one. For the November prompt, I simply read a book called Lost that I already had downloaded, and I only give it 1 star. I don't think on Goodreads I've ever just rated something 1 star. I usually give it at least 1.5. Did not jive with this book in the slightest. It's not a retelling of Cinderella, but it's like a sequel to Cinderella almost. It takes place after the original events of Cinderella occur. And at first it's an interesting premise. You get to see this epistolary look into Cinderella's life. So it's through her diary, and you're learning about her conflicts with the prince, and then her relationship with like the queen, so her mother-in-law, the troubles that she's having producing an heir like she's supposed to, and all of that stuff. 1, it's really slow. It's listed as only being like It's less than 200 pages, but for some reason it felt so long. Like it took me forever to read one page. And I don't know if it's just because of how it's formatted in the Kindle format or whatever, but it definitely seems longer than less than 200 pages because it took me almost an entire month to read. Granted, I would read it like right before I fell asleep, but still. So it's slow, there's that. I didn't really care about the character of Cinderella at all. Well, actually her name is Sophia, and I didn't really get that either. So there's that. And then all of a sudden there were a fae involved. So like you have half of the story and suddenly there was this silver fox and fae, and he was like partially controlling her mind and partially not, and then we were jumping around in time and I had no idea where we were or like what we were talking about or what she was even saying. And then somehow he got destroyed. Spoiler alert, somehow he got destroyed. It made no sense. It was like I read two totally separate books. There was like the beginning, which seemed like it was headed somewhere coherent, and then it veered off path completely. So like this was going to be like a 2 or 3 star book, and all of a sudden we hit the halfway point and things just got bizarre. I have literally no idea what happened in this. For the December prompt of like day, week, month, season, whatever, I read the Friday edition and I ended up giving it 3 stars. Once you got going with it, it was a really quick read. It was about Samantha Church. It's the first in the Samantha Church like mystery series, accidental PI series with a journalist main character. So Samantha Church is a journalist, but she's also an alcoholic and she insists that she's not, and it's causing a lot of problems in her life right now. She's currently divorced. Her ex-husband has full custody of her daughter, which is obviously very difficult for her to deal with. And then her sister, who is also an alcoholic, ends up dying on like Christmas, and it's initially ruled a suicide, but Samantha thinks that there's something more going on there. Her sister who died was an assistant district attorney for the place where they live. Accidental PI stuff happening with her sister too, and Samantha starts to slowly unravel all of that. So it was pretty interesting, like not the most mind-blowing thing ever, a pretty fun read, and have you focus on drug trafficking. The discussions in the book about that were really interesting and I thought they were pretty well done. This is the final book for this one. Done and dusted. Yeah. I'm going to quickly wrap this up. For the July prompt of last, I read The Last Thing She Saw, which I gave 2 stars. For the August prompt of Time of Day, I read Apache Dawn, which I also gave 2 stars. For the September prompt of Dark, I read We Set the Dark on Fire, which I believe I gave 4 stars. Yep, 4 stars. For the October prompt of Elements, I read Water Memory, which I gave 4 stars. For the November prompt of Lost, I read Lost, and then it had like a subtitle about it was the diary one, and I gave it 1 star. The December prompt of Day, Month, Season, I read the Friday edition, which I gave 3 stars. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below. Did you participate in Buzzwordathon this year? Are you participating in it next year? Which of these books seemed the most interesting to you? And subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!